Good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I appreciate that we've had to change this from a in-person event to a remote event, and hopefully this format through Microsoft Teams is working for you all, and we can share some knowledge today. So today's session is entitled A Walk Through Azure, and we have the ability to answer questions, so you should be able to have a chat box and I'll answer them as I go through the session or at the end of the session. So let's get started. So my name is Sarah Lean and I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I've been at Microsoft now for 2 years, and as a cloud advocate, my role is to try and share content with customers and people like yourselves and gather feedback, both good and bad, about Azure products, documentation, etc. Now you'll find me blogging at techielass.com, and I'm also on Twitter at Techielass as well. I've been in the IT industry for about 14 years now, and I'm fully in that IT pro or server engineer or infrastructure engineer category. So that's the kind of take that I come from when I'm attacking Azure or the cloud. Now, as I said, I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and the team I work with is global. So we occupy about 6 time zones at the moment. So it can be a bit frustrating trying to get a meeting with us all together, but we occasionally manage to do it. My team is built up of 8 of us, spanning that 6 different time zones. And you can find us blogging on our team blog, which is itopstalk.com. And this is a list of all the teammates that I have within that team. So please do look out for us on social media or at events when we are back doing in-person events. So as I said, tonight's session is around a walk through Azure, which is basically a kind of fundamentals around Azure and what it actually means. So I want to start off making sure we're all aware of some basic cloud computing terms. Now, apologies to those that are familiar with this, but I want to make sure we're all on the same level set and we can all understand what we're talking about when I later reference them. So the first one we want to talk about is some cloud computing types, and the first one is infrastructure as service, or IaaS. Now, IaaS is probably something we're mostly familiar with. It's very similar to what we currently do on-prem with Hyper-V or VMware virtualization technologies, where we're looking after the virtualization part of it, but not necessarily the hardware part of it. We also got platform as a service, or PaaS, which is starting to look at moving away from looking after the whole infrastructure. So you want to spin up a quick web app or something similar to that, but you don't have to really understand the operating system or manage how to install that IIS server component or even system updates for it as well. And then lastly, we've got software as a service, or SaaS, and that's where we're starting to get into centrally hosted platforms and software for the end user. And one of Microsoft's prime examples of this is Office 365, where you don't look after the hardware, you don't look after the operating system or any of that, you just consume that service. So when we think about this as in terms of what we have traditionally on-prem, we look after everything, right? We look after the networking, the servers, the middleware, the application. Even in some cases in my previous jobs, I've had to deal with CCTV and how you look after the building security or barbed wire, that kind of thing. There's the whole host of services that you have to look after end to end. But with infrastructure as service, it's different. As I said, you don't look after some of that. The vendor will look after the virtualization and the hardware for you, and you'll just care about the operating system and above. With platform as a service, there's even less that you look after. So you really just look after the applications and the data. And then lastly, software as a service, you look after none of that. You just consume the service that runs on top of all of that platform for you. So in terms of what that means in the Azure world, let's have a look at what that means. And This slide probably doesn't cover everything in Azure because I think at last count there was something like 240 different Azure services. But in terms of infrastructure as a service within Azure, that means things like virtual machines, whether that be a Linux virtual machine or a Windows one. Then we've got things like load balancers or firewalls or network watchers or even just our disk storage. When we then look at platform as a service, we're thinking about bigger things. We're looking at content delivery network, which is something we're actually using tonight to stream this event to you. And then we've got things like logic apps, which is a function where you can potentially pull in things like tweets on Twitter, then use artificial intelligence to figure out what sentiment that tweet is. So if it's a good message or a bad message, and then you can then do things with that. You know, you can start off a workflow for one of your customer service agents to actually answer that Twitter or whatever it may be. And there's different things. There's a whole host of them, and we can class like our SQL database as well as platform as a service. On top of that, we have things like our management, which is Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery. We have things like multi-factor authentication or Azure Active Directory, which is another identity plane, which isn't necessarily meant to actually replace Active Directory on-prem and probably doesn't have all the features that we have on-prem in Active Directory, but it complements it and helps you extend your network from on-prem into the cloud as well. Azure covers the whole world, so we have at last count 58 regions worldwide, and you'll see they do span the whole globe. We have ones in the UK, we have ones in Europe, ones in Asia and Australia. I think our newest announcement is our Spain data centre, Spain Central, which was announced 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. But this really means the flexibility of having your resources near your actual end users. So I know I've worked for companies in the past where all the services have been held in a data centre locally in Scotland in a business park somewhere, but they end up expanding the company and they end up with maybe employees down in Asia, and those Asian people have to then dial in all the way back into central Scotland to get the data services, and that's not always great, right? There's latency issues, support issues with the time zones, etc. So it can be quite frustrating for people. So with the ability to use the different Azure regions, you can look at actually hosting your data center services in different locations. So if you have people within the UK, you can host services in the UK. And if you have people in Asia, you could use one of the Asia regions as well. Now that does mean maybe doubling up your services or thinking about how you architect things differently from that point of view. And it may double some costs, but it gives your end users a much more pleasant experience in consuming these services that you have. So what I always like to show some people around the data centres is something that they don't necessarily see, to be honest, and that's some of the pictures from our data centre. Now, these pictures are a wee bit old, but in 2014, this was our Virginia data centre. Now, I think that's in the West US region. So this was in 2014, and if you have a wee look at it, you can see the different sizes of like the cars and the trucks. They're pretty tiny in terms of the buildings, and the scale of it looks massive. When we look at that data centre in 2017, it's massively grown, and you can see that small section we showed from 2014 has expanded. And again, looking at the trucks and the cars, everything's massive compared to those. Now, a data centre a little bit closer to home is the Dublin data centre, and we have different components. We have the Dublin data centre 3 and 4 beside each other. And again, if you look at some of the scales of where our cars are and the car park spaces, they're tiny compared to the buildings. When we start to look out a bit in terms of Dublin, we have Dublin 5, Dublin 3, Dublin 4. You can see that you maybe not be able to see in this picture, but there's different security measures around how you access these data centres as well. We have checkpoints for the cars coming in and stopping them. We have, you know, things that can puncture your tyres, all that kind of necessary security built into that. When we look at the scale slightly differently, we can start to see it in a bit bigger. So that's 3 and 4 up in the back of the picture. We then have 6, we have 7, we have 8, And then we have that Future Campus Works, which I believe is actually underway, as this is an older picture. But you can see the scale of it, and with all due respect to everybody's data centres, nobody has anything that's as big as this and is scalable and can be built out quite as much. Now, this is a really old picture. I think it's probably about 10 years old, but this is what we were trying to look at when we were building our data centres in terms of making them scalable and easily built out and easily replaceable. So it's kind of a container, like a shipping container, and inside are all the components. So all the compute, all the servers, all the networking are built into this container, and it's basically so as it can be lifted and shifted quite easily in and out of that data center. So we can build the data centers up fairly quickly because of these units. And again, if something happens to that unit, if it degrades over time, we can lift that out and put a different one back in, and again replace that compute back in for our end users. If you've got any questions, please use the Q&A functionality, and I'll be happy to try and pick them up as I'm going through, or if I'm going too fast or any feedback, please use the Q&A section for me. Now, I often get asked if we have any data centres in Scotland, and unfortunately we don't have any Azure data centres, but I'm pleased to say that we have something in Scotland in terms of data centre research, and that's called Project Natick, and that's a underwater data centre off the shores of Orkney, and this isn't an Azure region or an Azure data centre, but it is a data centre in its own right, and Microsoft are looking at that from terms of how we can use renewable energy in terms of like wave power to power these, and how we can actually use the oceans and the kind of resources around about us in order to actually make different uses of our data centres. Now, like I said, it's not an Azure data centre, but it is one that a lot of teams at Microsoft are using in terms of research projects. And if you follow the link on the screen right now, you'll be able to go to it. Now, there was a website, or a webcam that be able to view the data centre live while it was underwater, but unfortunately, things have grown all over these webcams and we can't see them, and I know the team are looking at trying to get back down there and clean it up at some point so as we can use those webcams. But that is something that we're looking at. We're not just looking at traditional data centres, we are exploring different methods for hosting our data centres. So I think we've got a question here in the Q&A about the containers and how much compute each add. To be honest, that information isn't shared with even myself. I just know that there's a lot of compute in each of these containers, and they are geographically spread out as well. I've got another question. The data centres seem clustered on big sites. How does resilience work, geographic separation for risks in terms of floods and fire? We still adhere to the same kind of principles in terms of what you would do on-prem. So I know for a lot of customers, we had, say, 30 miles different distance between data centres for DR resilience. Microsoft kind of do that as well. The data centres aren't that close. It's more probably, I think it's either 300 miles or 500 miles apart from each other in terms of regions. So usually when you see a country or a state, I'll use the UK as an example. So we have two data centres. We have UK South and UK West. Those data centres are probably 300, 500 miles away from each other in terms of distances. So if you host your services in UK South and you want DR or resilience built into your workloads, we tend to suggest using, say, the UK West, and you'll be protected from that because it's different powers. In terms of flooding and fire, you should be fairly distant from each other. I can dig out more information around how that works as we do actually share some of that in terms of disaster separation and stuff like that as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Gavin. In terms of Azure, We kind of say that we are 4 different things around that. We say that we're a productive, hybrid, open and trusted platform for our customers to utilise. And I fully believe that. Having worked in the cloud for probably about 5 years now, I've definitely seen Microsoft move towards this, and it's not a marketing ploy, and it's definitely not something that we just say to get customers on board. In terms of productivity, when we talk about that because we have infrastructure for all our workloads. I've been consulting, like I said, for about 5 years for customers moving their on-prem workloads into Azure, and I've yet to see a customer be stumped at how they move to Azure. There's always a solution available to them in Azure. You know, we have purpose-built solutions for SAP. So we currently work with SAP in order to make our compute and our storage compatible to their needs and utilise it properly. Same with NetApp, Cray and VMware. We can run VMs in Linux, we can run VMs in Windows. We have dedicated Red Hat engineers sitting at the end of the phone if you have a support issue. It's not just some person within a call centre, it's actually a Red Hat certified engineer we can pass you to if you have a Red Hat engineer. So there's different things that we do in order to give our customers the right productivity within their environment and make sure they're comfortable for what they want. We also have lots of data services. This isn't my area of expertise, but I know it's something that we work really hard on, especially in the SQL database. Obviously, being a Microsoft platform, we have lots of solutions and lots of things that can be utilised around all of that. We also look at some of the open source database services as well, PostgreSQL, MySQL, Redis Cache, and something that's fairly new or fairly innovative, Cosmos DB, around how we can scale those database services as well. I could probably sit here and talk for about 45 minutes on data services alone, but we tend to have a solution for your workload depending on what your need is. Even in terms of price points, everything is slightly different, so you should be able to find something that fits your workload and your operational need. We've also went down the route of serverless, and you're probably well familiar with everybody saying serverless nowadays, and that's around containers, you know, Docker, Kubernetes. We have artificial intelligence built into our platform. You can utilise a lot of our artificial intelligence as well. We've got websites, we've got mobile development, we've got fast paced development happening within that serverless environment as well. And across all of that, we can utilise Azure DevOps, either the product Azure DevOps, which you might know as VSTS for Visual Studio Team Services, or even just a DevOps methodology as well. So there's flexibility in the platform for you to be able to use what you need and when you need it as well. Now, the next one, hybrid, is something kind of close to my heart. As I said, I'm a server engineer. I'm used to having on-prem solutions and then being able to look at actually utilising things within the cloud as well. And I truly believe we are a hybrid cloud, and I truly believe that when I'm actually talking to customers around that. And that's because we have consistent services across the board, things that you can easily pick up because of what you've been using on-prem. An example is SQL Server. You can take your SQL Server workloads and host them in Azure, either as is in terms of, you know, a virtual machine and then a SQL install on top of that, or utilise SQL as a PaaS service where you don't have to look after the operating system and we do that for you. You've also got things like Active Directory. Now, I know I said Azure Active Directory isn't a direct replacement, but it helps leverage and helps create that one identity so you can sync your Azure, your on-prem Active Directory, into Azure Active Directory and start to utilise that for cloud services and have that one identity and access anywhere. There's also features within Azure Active Directory that can help you utilise the cloud as well. You have things like Azure DevOps, and like I said, that's VSTS in an older fashion. We can utilise that again on-prem. You can run all of that on-prem. It's not a cloud solution, but you can run it in the cloud if you want. And we're now starting to look at Azure Stack, where people can leverage some of the Azure services on-prem Now, Azure Stack shouldn't be used as an alternative to Azure. It shouldn't be seen as a replacement for that. But if you have a disconnected scenario, say you have to do compute off an oil rig somewhere in Scotland or whatever, and you're not always connected, or you don't have a reliable connectivity in terms of broadband, you can use Azure Stack on there to bring some of the compute services from Azure into your own workplace and utilize it from there as well. So there's different things that we can do to help build that hybrid cloud and make the services functional for you and your needs. We've also got an offer called Azure Hybrid Benefit, and that allows us to reuse our Windows Service and SQL Server licenses in the cloud as well. So if you have software assurance, you can start to use that license that you've purchased for on-prem into the cloud. And the way that benefits you is because when you spin up a virtual machine in Azure, you pay for storage, compute, and the licensing, especially in terms of Windows Server. If you have software assurance on-prem, you can take your license up into the cloud and only pay for the compute and storage of that virtual machine. So there's flexibility around that, and I've got resources later on that can help you delve into that if that's something you want to look at as well, or more information around. And something that we launched in November 2019, a few months ago, is something called Azure Arc. And that's the ability to try and manage all of these multi-cloud platforms or different environments. So what we found is lots of customers are looking at hosting services on-prem or in another cloud, be it Azure or AWS or GCP, and then have things on Azure Stack as well. And what's been happening is they've been struggling a bit with the management overview of that. Things start to get slipped through the cracks because there's so many platforms to manage. With Azure Arc, we can start to take some of the services and some of the management and security tools we have built into Azure and utilize them on-prem or in other clouds. I could probably do a talk again on this of 45 minutes on its own, but again, I'm going to have some resources at the end of it for you to have a look at as well. Got a question here around, in these corona heavy times, does Azure have anything to bring remote working online quickly, especially around virtual desktop? Yes, we do. We have solutions around Windows Virtual Desktop that can be spun up in a matter of or minutes, to be honest, and there's different things around some of that. I don't have any material in my presentation around that, but I can dig out some and talk to you more about that if that's something that you actually want to leverage. We also have Citrix that works on Azure. So again, some of the Citrix offerings can be spun up really quickly. I've seen people do it in meeting rooms and have virtual desktops in Citrix working as well. So if that's a platform that you are familiar with on-prem, you can start to use Citrix as well. But the Microsoft tool in terms of virtual desktops is virtual desktops. So if anybody has any questions around that, I'm happy to try and dig out material around that and talk about that later on as well. So the third thing that we talk about in terms of Azure is it being open. And I know in the past Microsoft haven't had great press around some of the decisions that we've made or some of the things that we've done for other ecosystems. But as you can see from this timeline, we're starting to change that. The man in charge, Satya Nadella, is changing all of that. We truly do love Linux. Most of our platform now runs on Linux, and we are Linux friendly. We are looking at doing things like running SQL on Linux, which I never thought would be possible, or having Linux running on Windows 10. You can actually have Linux running on your Windows 10 laptop at the same time as Windows that works in a containerized kind of fashion, and you can run those two platforms together, and I know that's been welcomed by a lot of the community in the open source. And controversially, I know again this was something that some people liked and some people didn't. We purchased GitHub in late 2018, 2019, and that's allowed us to do a lot more things as well and try and open up that community feeling. Azure is a fully compliant open source ecosystem. I'm sure you'll recognise a few of these logos here on screen around what we can actually run. We can run things like WordPress or Joomla, which I've used both in production workloads and in side projects, and you can spin them up in Azure and they're fully supported. If you want to use things like Chef or Ansible in terms of being able to manage your workloads and utilise them, you can. But there's lots of things that we can do, and I know there's more than just this what we've got on the slide here, but there's tons of things that you can utilise in the open source world in Azure. We really are supportive of that, and I know that in the past we've got people within my team who've been really sceptical about working for Microsoft because of previous decisions, have now changed their mind around that and are now working in Azure and working on some of these products we've got on screen here. So we've definitely changed in terms of who we are now. And the last one on my screen is trusted. And again, Microsoft have worked really hard in terms of building Azure to make it trusted. A lot of the certifications and the audits and the industry certifications that you have to go through and are probably familiar with going through, we are certified in them, and we can help you build that trust and enable you to pass those audits and understand all of those questions that you get from your auditors. There's only a few on here, but I know we have tons more. And again, we have a Azure Trust Centre that goes into more detail around what these certifications are. And we have dedicated teams working on these certifications so that we're fully compliant and constantly adding. So if we have customers that need something added in terms of certification, we work towards that as well. And we provide documentation around all of this, again, so you can pass that on to your auditors. We also take security very seriously. We spend over $1 billion on annual investments around security on Azure, and we have dedicated security teams. We do look at all of this data. I think last time I looked at some figures, we had like 1.2 billion devices actually being scanned and giving us data and signals around how to protect our environments. And we constantly are evolving our solutions in order to help our customers. So if we see one customer being attacked by DDoS and we stop that and we trace whoever it was that did that, we block that person, not just for the customer that they attacked, but for all of Azure. So if one customer gets attacked or we see some kind of attack vector, the kind of mitigations that we go through in order to protect that customer gets rolled out across all of Azure. So we don't just protect one customer, we protect everybody. Now, I know I've talked a lot about what Azure is and what it does. I want to actually flip to a demo and kind of show you what the Azure portal looks like. So let me just switch screens and we'll jump across. So 2 seconds. So this is Microsoft Learn, and this is our learning platform, and I'll talk about it in more detail. But what we have within Microsoft Learn is a bunch of modules where you can learn different things, and we have the ability to kind of dive into these modules. And what I want to show you in this demo is actually creating a virtual machine within Azure. So if we search for virtual machine, we can jump into the module that shows us how to create an Azure virtual machine, and we'll skip through to the next one. You can see there's different information around all of that. Within Microsoft Learn, we have something called sandboxes, and this is where you can actually start to play with Azure without actually consuming anything. So you don't have to pay for it. So we'll just spin that up at the moment in the back end. Hopefully it'll be fairly quick. But basically the sandbox is spun up within Azure with logging into your account, but you don't actually pay for the resources that you spin up. So if you create a virtual machine, you're not actually going to pay for it within the Microsoft Learn platform. So if we click on the link to the Azure portal, it'll open up a new tab for us. and open up the Azure portal. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but we have different GUI versions, and we have like a menu bar down the left hand side, and you can pin your favorite ones to this as well. Now, in order to create that virtual machine, what we're going to do is click on create a resource. And you can see we've got these kind of popular templates, or we've got the marketplace. Now I'm going to click on Windows Server 2016 data center because we want to spin up a Windows server within Azure. And what it takes us through to is a bunch of questions that we have to answer. So the first question is around your subscription. Because this is Microsoft Learn, we're going to use the concierge subscription. We're going to click on a resource group that's been spun up within this sandbox from Learn. And we need to give this virtual machine a name. So if we call it VM BSC, we are asked about the region that we want to host this virtual machine in. And because we're in the UK, I'm going to pick UK South. We're not going to pick any infrastructure redundancy, but you could have availability zone or availability set, which gives you a bit more protection if something actually happened to the UK South region. But as this is just a test, we're not really concerned around that. Now, the main question we want to answer here is around size. So you can see that when the suggested size is something called standard DS1 V2, and that gives us one CPU and one vCPU, sorry, and 3.5 gig of RAM. And that's going to cost us around $107 a month. We can change that to something that we want and start to look at the different sizes. Now, there's tons and tons of different sizes, each with their own use case and with the pricing. As this is just a test, we're actually going to just leave it at the suggested size, but you could change it if you wanted to, depending on your needs. And I know I've spun up some beefy virtual machines with NVIDIA graphics card to produce some videos quicker than my laptop can on occasion. So I'm going to give my username and password. So if you just put in a secure username and password. The next question we're asked is around ports and what ports we want to be open. Now, if you were deploying a production environment, you'd probably start to think about firewalls and networking and various different things around all of that. But in this case, we're just looking at a test environment, so we're just going to use open up RDP, so 3389. This will mean that everybody in the internet, so anywhere in the world, could find my IP address, find that port and log into that box. So that's obviously a security risk. So that's why I'm saying when you're looking at production environments, you want to start thinking about firewalls and how you would protect it, the exact same you would do for on-prem environments. Now, here we have this question around server licensing, and if we have software assurance on-prem and we want to take that license into the cloud, we can do. I'm not going to do that because I don't have that software assurance license. Now, the next question is around disks and disk sizes, and we want to pick the operating system disk type. So you have the selection of standard, or you have premium or standard HDD. Now, the standard one will be a bit slower than premium, but again, the price will differ. So you want to make sure you're picking the right one for your workload. So I'm just going to pick premium in this case. And then the next screen is around networking. And again, we're given a basic setup in terms of networking. Again, if you're deploying a production workload, you're probably going to look at building out your subnets and your networking before you actually start putting virtual machines into it. Again, we're asked to confirm the inbound ports. And again, we're okay with this because it's just a standard kind of test box as well. Now, the next one's about management and adding on some functionality around what we want this virtual machine to have. We have the capabilities of trying to log the boot diagnostics. So if something happened to that virtual machine and we couldn't boot into it, we can start to look at the diagnostics of what happened. We can see the operating system guest diagnostics as well. Where these diagnostics end up into is a storage account and a dedicated storage account. So it's something you want to think about if you want to put all of your virtual machine diagnostics into a specific storage account or not. Something else to think about here is the auto shutdown and whether you want to enable auto shutdown or not. I tend to do this even on my test workloads, because every time a virtual machine is spun up in Azure and is on, you are paying for those compute and storage costs constantly. And you're paying for them. So if you're not using that workload, so in some of my production workloads, if I'm forgetting to spin that off at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock whenever I log off, I don't want to be paying for that compute and that storage, so I can enable the auto shutdown. So we'll put this at 10 p.m. and we'll say we want to notify me with an email so that if I'm using it, I can actually stop it and stop the shutdown happening. Now, the advanced one is more around some of the things you can do with Linux and things we start to look at when we actually have physical servers within Azure. But we're going to ignore this at the moment because it's taken us into more advanced technology around Azure. Something I always recommend my customers use is something called tagging. And that's the ability of just putting little markers against what this resource is for, so that you can, your colleagues, when they go into your Azure subscription, can have a look at it and determine what it was spun up at. Here I'm going to put in usage, and I'm going to put in test. And that way, if someone comes across it, they'll see that it's a test resource and they can potentially turn it off or switch it, delete the resource. If it was a production workload, I'd probably put production in there so that, again, I don't have any issues around that. And then we review all of these settings. So all of these settings will be pulled together and checked, and then we can actually create that virtual machine. So it's passed all the validation checks and it's got all the right answers, and we create that resource. Now, hopefully this will be fairly quick in terms of spinning it up, and we'll be able to see, we can see in the notification area that it's submitting that deployment for us and starting to do that. If we click on it, we'll then be taken through to actually see what's happening, and we see the different parts of that resource being spun up as we go through. So again, if anybody's got any questions, please do reach out in the Q&A while we wait for this. Hopefully it won't take too long. We can see now that the resources are actually starting to spin up. We've got this public IP address here being spun up. We've got the storage account for all of our diagnostics being spun up as well. And hopefully it will spin up the virtual machine, and we'll be able to see that being created in our environment. Does anyone have any specific questions around any of this, or want me to go over anything while we're waiting on this virtual machine being spun up? I can see here that our virtual network's being spun up. It's saying internal server error, so we'll see if it actually spins it up or not. What we'll actually do is look at another one of my resources while we're waiting on that. If we go into, if we break out of the Learn platform and go into my actual Azure tenant, we can start to see some of the resources that have been spun up. So if we go into resource groups, I'll just zoom in a little. You can see I've got various different resource groups here created for different purposes. If we go into one called RG Data Center, we can see different components around what I've created. So this is a lab environment. Oh, all right, clicked the wrong button there. This is a lab environment that I have, and it's got various different servers in it. It's a mini data center that I use to do some labbing. We can see that we've got network security groups, storage accounts, the virtual machines, public IP addresses, network interfaces, all the bits you probably expect to see around creating a virtual server. All of these are shut down at the moment, but if we click into it, you can see various different components around it. We can see that it's stopped. We can see that we can start it, that it's a Windows server. We've got sizes. When we spin this up, we'd get a public IP address. There's various different components, and we have the ability to connect into that. Again, we can create that RDP connection within that environment. I've also got various different other bits. So I've got Docker containers here with a Cosmos DB account that stores some information around some of the public speaking events that I've done in the past. There's various different things within the Azure portal, but hopefully it's something that you can see happening and you can easily understand. I know when I was first learning Azure, I found it really easy to look through all the various different components within it, because it kind of looks like any other Microsoft platform that we've utilised, right? And you can drive through that quite easily. Let's have a wee look and see if this virtual machine has actually spun up in our environment. So it looks like it has actually spun up. We've got that virtual machine there. We've got our public IP address and various different components around all of that as well. It's still actually creating it at the moment, so it's still spinning it up, but it's starting to create all those different components for us in the background. So let me switch back into the presentation and continue on. So as I mentioned, getting starting in Azure can be fairly daunting, but we have a bunch of resources that can actually help you. And as I demonstrated, we have Microsoft Learn, which, as I said, is a learning platform that's completely free for anybody to jump into. If you go to the link on the slide, you can start there and you can start creating your account and jump in. Like I said, we have hands-on learning, so we have the ability to spin up Azure resources. You can jump into the training and pick up modules. You know, if you've only got 5-10 minutes, you can pick up a module and run with it. We have modules that are a few minutes long, or we have modules in learning paths that are hours long, so you can spend a couple of weeks working along that. You have the ability to sort things differently, so based on your job type or what your learning needs are. If you want to learn about Azure, or if you want to learn about Microsoft 365, or maybe even Dynamics, you can have a look at that as well. What some of my customers have actually really liked about this, and we like internally, is that you can actually earn points for every module that you complete, and you can start to have a bit of a competitive nature around all of that if you wanted to within your team. I know some customers have done where they want to make sure people are learning and are having that kind of thirst for knowledge, and they have wee competitions within their teams where whoever has the most points at the end of a week or end of a month actually get gift vouchers for, you know, like a local restaurant or something. So you can make it a bit competitive if that's something in your environment that you want to do. Pluralsight is probably something you might be familiar with. Again, it's another learning platform. Often Pluralsight charge for a lot of their courses, but a lot of the Azure courses are actually free. So you can sign up and work through the Azure training for free. So it's something to have a look at if you've previously maybe dismissed it because of charges as well. We have a thing called the Azure Free account, which gives you free access to services for 12 months. And you also get 30 days worth of $150 worth of credit. So if you click on the link on screen, you can actually go in and create an account within Azure and have the ability to create resources and play with that and get free credit to utilise it as well. Now, if you've spent a lot of time having a look at some of these resources and want to certify and just, consolidate your learning and prove that you've spent all this time, you can go on one of the certification paths. Now, the way we're trying to do certifications now at Microsoft is slightly different than in the past. In the past, we probably did it towards a product. I know I sat exams based on Exchange or SQL and gained those. We're now trying to do it in terms of job role. Across the board, we have the fundamentals level. So we have the Azure fundamentals level or Microsoft 365 or Dynamics fundamental exams. And those exams are around for everybody. So I've sat the Azure fundamentals ones, and I know project managers, we've had stakeholders and customers do it, management teams, anybody, sales teams, project managers can look at these. The exams are based to help everybody understand the cloud and everybody start on that Azure journey as well. You then have the more maybe advanced exams where you actually have to start to look at using Azure every day to pass them. We have security exams, developer exams, administrator exams, and then we have the tier above that again, which is architect exams and solution engineer exams. And like I said, we have those tracks across Azure Apps and Infra, the data and AI, modern workplace, which is Microsoft 365 or Office 365, and then we have the Dynamics exams as well. Now that's kind of all that I wanted to cover tonight, to be honest. I've got additional reading, so if you want to follow up and read more about what I've mentioned during the presentation, you can go to this link and it'll take you to a blog post that has links to different material that you can have a read at and share with some of your colleagues as well. My information is on screen as well. You can get me on Twitter at Techielass, on my blog, or you can email me at techielass@microsoft.com if you've got any questions or want to follow up on anything that I've maybe mentioned tonight. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got anything at the moment. Still got some time, so if you want to ask some questions, please do let me know. Just pop them in the Q&A box and I can answer them. So one of the questions is, do virtual machines exist within a standard Azure security model, or is it the user's responsibility to design and apply security policies? So we'll make sure all of the hardware and that kind of thing and the infrastructure behind that is secure, but it's really, again, that shared responsibility for end users to do that. Like I was saying around opening port 3389, if you open that, you're going to open it up into the world and potentially attacks, and that's your responsibility to secure that down. Again, it's your responsibility to have secure passwords and secure usernames. We'll suggest a certain length of password for you, etc. But again, it's up to you to try and do that as well. So there's a shared responsibility. You can design different security policies and lay them out across all of your Azure resources using Azure policy. So that there is a standard policy for your organisation, but again, it's that secured kind of shared threat model. We'll take care of the physical for you, but anything else you have to look at for virtual machines. Also around limits on the sandboxes within Microsoft Learn. So I don't know if you saw on the screen, but I think there's a limit of 20 sandboxes a day that you can spin up. So there is some kind of limit that we apply to that. I personally have spent quite a lot of time working through Microsoft Learn as I've been tasked to think about bettering the content and creating new content. And I don't think I've hit that limit. I think I've been quite happy to use it, to be honest, and not hit anything. You're not allowed to do massive graphical processing PCs and stuff. I don't think you can spin up at that. We do limit some of that, but you have the ability within the sandboxes to do what you need in terms of learning and having a little hands-on play with those boxes as well. We've got another question here around how easy is it to port an old application, say SQL plus C or SQL plus Python to Azure? Does it have to be IaaS or PaaS? No, you could do it as IaaS. So if you currently have it hosted on a server on your prem, you can just lift and shift that, like we call it, into Azure, or you can look at doing something differently with PaaS services. It's not necessarily my area of expertise around C or Python. So I think Peter Gray asked that question. If there's something that you specifically have a question around or a workload, if you want to ping me on my email address, I can ask one of my colleagues that knows more about that. Then they can try and answer that question more specifically for you if you're needing some clarity around the design of that. Got another question here around TCO calculators that are really approachable, and does Microsoft provide one to justify the move from on-prem to cloud? That's a really good question. We actually do have a total cost of ownership calculator that you can use. You can put in all of your on-prem environment, so you can put in how many servers you have, what age those servers are. You can put in if you know the cost of your electricity costs and stuff like that. And then Azure, you can use the total cost of ownership calculator to actually then look at what it would cost on Azure, and you can compare those. And I think it compares it from a 1-year cost point and then a 5-year cost point, I think, if I remember right. It's been a while since I used it, but it's certainly available in order to do that. And again, I've used that with customers as well. There's other tools, things like Azure Migrate, that you can use to actually evaluate and really understand your on-prem environment, especially if you're utilising virtual machines and looking to move those virtual machines into Azure. And it'll give you a proper breakdown, a really detailed breakdown of what it would cost within Azure. So there's a variety of different things that you can use to do that total cost of ownership calculator. I'll update that blog post that I've referenced on screen right now to link to some of the total cost of ownership calculators for you as well. I've got a question here around what does Cortex do? That's not something I'm familiar with, unfortunately. Is that an on-prem service? Sorry, it's not something I know about. Has anybody else got any questions? Have I answered everybody's questions? Or again, I'm here for a wee while if you want to ask some questions, or my details are on screen if you want to reach out. I'd also be interested to see if people enjoyed this experience. This is the first time I've done a Teams event like this. Slightly strange not being in the same room as you all and being able to get instant feedback. So I'd really appreciate any feedback, positive or negative, around this presentation format and how you like the Teams event as well. Again, I suppose we're all learning in this new way of doing it. So virtual desktop, yes. So let's have a wee look. So I'm going to just change my screen here in a second. So as I said, we have something called Windows Virtual Desktop that you can deploy and quite quickly in terms of environments, and it allows you to utilise those kind of Windows 10 environments as well. This is on screen right now. I'm showing the documentation page that we have around some of that. We have a virtual event that you can drive into and have a look at and see more about it. But we have really thought about what we've done in terms of the multi-session kind of virtual environment experience. We've got it so that Windows 10 works on it very scalable. We've got Office 365 experience is very good. I know there's been some issues around things like Outlook profiles and stuff like that being created, but we've worked really hard with all the teams and all the different experiences to make this really work for you. And you can spin it up really quite quickly in terms of doing it. Is there anything specific you've actually looked at virtual desktop and wanted more information around? It definitely is a solution to look at in terms of remote working. I know lots of companies at the moment are obviously trying to look at solutions, and some people haven't given their employees laptops, and sending people home to use their own equipment isn't ideal, isn't secure. There could be risks around that. I know there's also issues around, ordering laptops, building them, and providing people with all of that kit. So using this virtual desktop is actually really quite a good solution. I'm not a massive expert on it, but I know that lots of customers, and I know I've got some people I can reach out to in terms of actually looking at it. I think in terms of how it actually costs, there's different ways that we cost it, and again, it's around what I think, and I'll need to have a dig at this, to be honest. It's around what you currently have on-prem, some of your licenses as well, and some of your, again, bandwidth requirements in terms of what you want to do. I think we don't necessarily put pricing specifically on it because everybody's slightly different because of what they have in terms of current licensing and current setup. Again, the Active Directory, you probably have to look at syncing up with Azure Active Directory in terms of being able to extend that experience and looking at that. We should have our documentation. If it hasn't been any good for you in terms of answering some of these questions, please do let me know, and we can actually look at fixing that issue for everybody and getting your specific questions answered around it as well. As I said at the start of the presentation, there's probably about 240 odd services in Azure. I can cover some of them at certain different levels, and I can go deep dive in some of the other ones that exist. Virtual desktop isn't one I can deep dive in, but I know people that deep dive in it and can provide us the right answers to a lot of this as well. So we can talk about that offline if there's specific questions or issues you're having around some of this as well. Got a question here about what do you find to be the coolest thing on Azure? I just love the flexibility of being able to utilise anything on Azure at the moment. There's constantly something for me to learn about. There's constantly changes happening. And like I said, the flexibility of being able to spin up a virtual machine. I think we saw a virtual machine spin up in 5-10 minutes. I don't think I was ever able to do that on-prem in terms of, even if I templated it, I was never able to do that, and being able to play with that. There's a lot of things I want to lab up and test and play out. I know probably tomorrow I'm going to be looking a wee bit deeper into Windows Virtual Desktop now that you've asked those questions, and I'll be able to spin that up, and I'll probably have a kind of working concept or some kind of play around with that within maybe 5-10 minutes probably, and then I'll need to refine it to learn it. But that is the coolest thing I think about Azure. I can go in and just spin up something really quickly, try and dig into it, try and follow some of the documentation and learn about it hands-on. I'm not restricted. Yes, it does cost to do some of this, but I'm only paying for it as I'm spinning it up. And if I pay for it for 10 minutes, I'm paying for that cost for 10 minutes. I haven't had to sit and do a change request. I haven't put in a PO request. I haven't went through different, 3 different levels of leadership in order to get that and see if it's a working solution for my organisation. I've just maybe spent $10, $20 worth of our Azure credit to find out quickly if something works for our environment or doesn't work, and then being able to move on to the next thing. Previously on-prem, you might have had to spend 3 or 4 weeks trying to do that and figure it out. So yeah, that's the coolest thing. That was probably a really long answer, to be honest, in that question. I've really enjoyed this tonight. Hopefully you all have as well. Like I said, if they've got any more questions, I'm available on Twitter or my email address, and you can reach out to me anytime. I'm hoping that this meeting should be recorded, so I will try and get that live stream and share some of that if you want to have a look at the details or share it with any of your team if this has been useful. But again, thank you for your time. Any feedback, good, bad, indifferent, I'd really love to hear it. And hopefully once everything settles down a bit in the world, I can maybe get up to Aberdeen and visit you all in person. I know I've got some cool swag to run a quiz competition with, so hopefully we can do that in the future at some point. If there's no other questions, I will wrap it up and let you all get back to sitting and watching some Netflix or building some Lego models and enjoying the rest of your evening. Cool. Thank you for all your time, and yeah, please do reach out and hopefully see you again. Until then, stay safe, everybody.